My parents said they regret giving birth to me because I decided to be a plumber. I didn't argue. I packed silently. The next day, I left. They thought it was business as usual until they started regretting everything. My name's Eli, and I fix what people flush, flood, or forget about. Plumbing's not glamorous, but it's honest. I know what a cracked pipe smells like before I even step through the door. And funny enough, I can say the same about the way people treat each other. You learn to hear the pressure building in silence, to sense when something's rotting behind the walls. I used to think it was my job to patch things up quietly, just like I did with my family. But that night, the last night I sat across the table from them, I finally realized that not everything broken deserves to be fixed. Let me quickly thank you for your continuous support. This means a lot to us. If you enjoy the stories we share, kindly subscribe to this channel. It will be great if you can leave a comment on which city you are watching from. We might just give you a shout out in our next story. Today's special shout out goes to Paula Joseph from San Antonio. We are glad you enjoy our stories. Now let's go deeper into today's story. Dinner at my parents' house was always a slow kind of punishment, like death by 1,000 digs. That night, it was roast beef, overcooked, as always, and sliced just a little too thin. My mother had a thing about appearances. She laid the table like it mattered who we were pretending to be. My father was nursing a beer. My brother, Daniel, was late as usual, probably off somewhere being the hero they raised him to be. He worked at an accounting firm uptown, clean suits, polished shoes, big talk. The family's golden boy. They still believed he was the one paying their mortgage, their car, the new appliances in the kitchen. They didn't know it was me. You still crawling under houses? My dad asked, not looking up from his plate. I didn't respond right away, just kept chewing, counting in my head like I always did when I needed to stay calm. 1, 2, 3. Must be rough, always being in the dirt, he added, laughing like he'd made a clever joke. That's no life, son. I'm doing okay, I said quietly, stabbing at the carrots. Pays the bills. My mother sipped her wine and rolled her eyes. Some bills, maybe. You could have done more with yourself, Eli. You had potential. There was a pause. One of those tight silences where nobody breathes too loudly. And then she smirked, turning to my father. Sometimes I think we should have stopped at Daniel. 1 perfect child is a blessing. 2, well, it just spreads the luck too thin. I stared at her for a long moment. Not angry. Not even shocked. Just hollow. Like she'd finally said what she'd been meaning to say for years, and now that it was out, we could stop pretending. My father didn't say a word. Just kept chewing, as if the silence was safer than picking sides. I finished my plate. Didn't speak. Didn't argue. Just pushed the chair back slow enough not to make a sound. Everything all right? She asked, blinking like she might have gone too far. Yeah, I said. Early work tomorrow. I drove back to the apartment I rarely used, half storage unit, half crash pad. Sat on the edge of the bed in my work pants, boots still muddy from the crawl space I'd been in that morning. And then I opened my laptop. One by one, I logged into every account I'd created years ago when the bank had threatened to repossess their home. I didn't tell anyone then. Just started paying what I could. The mortgage, the car, a couple maxed out credit cards. They never asked where the help came from. Just assumed it was Daniel. Because of course it was. I canceled the auto pay on all of it that night. Closed the online portal and leaned back in the dark, listening to the soft hum of the refrigerator. That sound was the only witness to what I'd done. No speeches. No revenge playlist. Just a quiet end to a quiet sacrifice. That was the last thing I gave them. The next morning, I packed my tools and a duffel bag of clothes and drove straight to the small house I'd bought 5 towns over. No one knew about it. It had taken me 6 years to save the down payment, working weekends and side jobs most nights. When I first got the keys, I didn't tell a soul. Not even my ex, not my friends. Just me, the creaking wood floors, and the weight of knowing I'd built something no one could take credit for. They called me 3 days later. First my mother, then my brother. I let it ring. I wasn't ready to hear the panic in their voices, not yet. They had no idea the payments had stopped, but something told me they were starting to notice the cracks. People like them, they never noticed the scaffolding. Just the view. Now the scaffolding was gone. That Sunday, Daniel left a voicemail. Hey, have you been paying mom and dad stuff? Mortgage? Utilities? They're saying things are getting weird with the bank. I don't know what's happening. I played that message 3 times. Not because I needed clarity, but because I'd never heard uncertainty in his voice before. That was new. That was mine. By the time I got around to calling the electric company to confirm the shutoff schedule, I'd already stopped feeling guilty. There was a strange calm to it all, like exhaling after holding your breath for years. For the first time, I wasn't propping up a lie. I wasn't playing support to a story where I didn't even get to be background. I was the one who left. The one they said was too small, too dirty, too ordinary. And now they were going to see just how much of their life had been built on my silence. I didn't disappear out of spite. I disappeared out of clarity. The kind of clarity that only comes when you stop trying to belong where you're not wanted. After I turned off the last bill and locked the front door of my new house, I remember standing on the porch for a long time with my keys in hand, like I didn't quite believe it was mine. The house was plain gray siding, creaky porch boards, no landscaping, but it was mine. No one else's name on the deed. No one else taking the credit. It was a kind of peace I wasn't used to, the kind that doesn't come with applause or even comfort, just the quiet relief of finally being unseen by the people who never really looked at you in the first place. The first few days, I didn't speak to anyone, didn't turn on the TV, just sat in the silence and let it settle in my chest. There was no traffic outside, just wind, birds, the occasional hum of a neighbor's lawnmower down the block. I fixed the leaky kitchen faucet on day 2, replaced a cracked window pane by day 3. Small things, but they felt like declarations. Each screw tightened, each hinge oiled was like telling the house, and myself, that I wasn't going anywhere this time. I was staying. For once, I wasn't renting a corner of someone else's life. I wasn't a guest in the shadows. I was home. In the back bedroom, I set up a fold-out table as a desk and started laying out the invoices and service logs from my plumbing jobs. I'd always kept them in boxes before, just shoved under beds or stacked in corners. But here, I gave them their own place. I started tracking which clients tipped me, who asked about my weekend, who offered me water in the summer heat. You learn a lot about people when you're under their sinks. They forget you're there. They talk on the phone, argue with their spouses, sometimes cry. I've seen more marriages fall apart from behind bathroom vanities than I care to count. It took about a week before the silence was interrupted. First, my brother. He started leaving messages. Not angry ones, yet. Just confused. Hey, Eli. I'm trying to get in touch with the bank, and they said the last few mortgage payments didn't go through. I thought you said you'd. Never mind. Can you call me back? I didn't. Instead, I replayed it while screwing a new brass doorknob into the back door. There was something almost medicinal about hearing him squirm. He wasn't used to it, the feeling of not knowing, of being left out of the loop. For once, he was the one asking questions no one wanted to answer. By week 2, the calls doubled. My mother's voice cracked in one of them. Eli, sweetheart, just let us know you're okay. Things are a little strange right now. The electric bill hasn't cleared, and the bank's saying we're behind. Please call. I listened, but I didn't respond. Not because I wanted them to suffer. That wasn't the point. I just wanted them to know what it felt like to stand at the edge of something and realize you were never really holding it up to begin with. That the person you dismissed, belittled, called a waste of potential, was the one quietly keeping your world from collapsing. And now they'd have to face the weight of that absence day by day, unpaid bill by unpaid bill. By the end of the month, the house was beginning to change. Not just structurally, but emotionally. I started hanging up pictures, not family ones, but landscapes I'd taken on my phone over the years during late-night drives. I found an old coffee mug in a thrift store that said, "World's Okayest Son," and laughed so hard I almost dropped it. I bought it, of course. Put it right by the sink, where I'd see it every morning. It was the only kind of trophy I wanted now. Something that didn't pretend. Something that didn't lie. I stopped checking my messages after a while. It wasn't that I didn't care. I just didn't need to hear them anymore. They said the same things, just with different tones, panic, confusion, guilt dressed up as concern. But none of them said what mattered. None of them said, we were wrong. None of them said, you mattered more than we ever let you believe. One afternoon, I drove past my parents' street. Not to see them, just to see the house. I parked a block away and walked slow, like a stranger. The lawn was overgrown. The porch light was flickering. Their car, my father's pride and joy, had a ticket tucked under the windshield. I didn't go any closer. Didn't need to. That house looked just like what it was now, something unheld. I passed Daniel's apartment too, on the way back. His fancy place downtown with the clean brick facade and covered parking. Only now, the parking spot was empty. The car was gone. Repossessed, probably. I didn't smile. I just nodded to myself like a man confirming what he already knew. When the scaffolding goes, the building cracks. That night, I sat in my backyard with a beer and a bag of nails and started planning a small garden bed. I wasn't much of a gardener, but I wanted to try. Something small. Ground level. Just mine. I dug in the dirt with my hands first, feeling the earth under my nails. It was the same dirt I crawled through every day, the same soil my family turned their noses up at. But to me, it was grounding. It was real. People always think disappearing is some dramatic escape, a one-way road trip, a fake name, some poetic exit. But the truth is, it's quieter than that. It's choosing not to answer. It's planting something in your own backyard instead of watching someone else's garden rot. I thought being alone would feel like punishment, like exile. But it was quieter than that, less dramatic, more slow and necessary, like a body learning to breathe after being underwater too long. I didn't realize how much of my life had been noise until it all stopped. The constant low hum of trying to prove myself, the sharp stabs of being compared, the 1,000 tiny moments of pretending not to notice when I was overlooked. Out here, in this house no one knew, surrounded by nothing but the creak of the floors and the hiss of old pipes, I could finally hear myself think. And what I thought was this: maybe I'd never been the broken one. Maybe I was just trying to function in a place that never saw me as whole. The days settled into a rhythm. I woke up early, brewed my coffee strong, and took my time fixing up each room. The place had good bones, solid foundation, no major issues, but it needed care. I started with the kitchen, stripped the old linoleum, replaced it with dark tile I picked out on a whim. Not because anyone would see it, just because I liked the way it felt under my boots. Next, I repainted the walls in soft gray, covered the yellowing outlets, replaced the cabinets one hinge at a time. It was methodical work. Simple, clean, honest. Every screw I drove into the wall felt like a sentence in a story I was writing for myself. No audience. No judgment. Just proof that I was still here. The garden bed I'd started in the backyard became a kind of ritual. I didn't know much about plants, but I looked it up in the evenings, learned about soil composition, watering schedules, the stubbornness of root rot. I planted basil, rosemary, a few tomatoes. Something about it felt right. Like growing things for myself was the opposite of what I used to do, feeding everyone else's comfort, trimming my needs down until I was barely a person anymore. Out here, things could die, and it would be okay. But if they grew, that would be mine. At night, I sat in the garage on an old milk crate and wrote in a leather-bound notebook I'd found in a thrift shop. I didn't call it a journal. Something about that word made me feel 12 again, but I wrote like someone was finally listening. Not my family. Not anyone from back then. Just someone. Maybe the version of me that never got to speak. I wrote about the time I fixed the leaky kitchen pipe and heard my parents arguing about how Daniel deserved more help. I wrote about birthdays I spent alone because I was on call and no one asked if I wanted to come home. I wrote about the letter I almost sent once, listing every bill I'd paid, every silent bailout, but burned instead because I didn't want to be that person who begged to be seen. The anger didn't come in waves. It came like sediment, slow, layering, quiet. Not rage, just weight. And the weight was starting to lift. Not because they apologized. They hadn't. Not because they reached out with anything resembling truth. They hadn't. But because I'd stopped needing them to. I found a photo in one of my old work bags. Me and Daniel as kids, sitting on the back porch, both holding popsicles. I must have been 8. He was 10. We looked like brothers then. Like equals. No labels yet. No resentment. No pedestal. I stared at that photo for a long time and finally slid it into a drawer. Not out of spite. Just to let it rest. One afternoon, while hauling plywood from the truck, I heard the buzz of my phone inside. I ignored it. But when I checked later, it was a text from Daniel. Mom and Dad are 3 months behind on the mortgage. Utilities are off. What the hell is going on? Call me. I didn't reply. Not because I didn't have words, but because I finally understood that saying nothing was a kind of reply, one they'd never taught me how to give. All those years, I'd thought silence was weakness, that if I didn't defend myself, I was complicit. But I see it now, silence can be ownership. Refusal. A kind of boundary they can't step over no matter how loud they shout. That same evening, I got a knock on the door. Not from family, God no. It was an older woman from 3 doors down, Miss Halvorson. Her sink had started leaking, and she couldn't afford a plumber. I offered to take a look. She offered sweet tea and homemade banana bread in return. Her kitchen smelled like cinnamon and age and something steady. I fixed the leak in under 30 minutes, and she thanked me like I'd saved her life. "You're good at this," she said, watching me pack up my tools. "Yeah," I said, smiling for what felt like the first time in weeks. "I know." I walked home with the banana bread wrapped in foil and something heavy pressing against my chest, but not in a bad way. It felt like the kind of weight that roots have. The kind that means you're finally standing somewhere you belong. Later that night, I dug back through my old emails. Found every receipt from the mortgage payments. Every transaction. Every statement. It was all there. Years of proof that the successful son had never paid a dime. That the disappointment had been their lifeline. I didn't send it. Not yet. But I organized the files, made a folder, and labeled it for when they lie again. I went to bed with my windows open and no voicemail notifications. No guilt. No need to explain or justify. Just the soft sound of night wind rustling through tomato vines. Sometimes, the only thing more powerful than yelling your truth is building a life so solid, so undeniably yours, that they can't touch it. Even when they finally start telling the truth. You ever notice how silence doesn't echo until someone tries to fill it? I stayed gone long enough for the air between us to turn into something sharp, something that made every word they didn't say start to cut. It had been over a month since I pulled the plug on everything. No money, no contact, no apologies. And yet, their voices still found ways to crawl into my life like mildew in a damp corner. At first, it was voicemails, desperate, then defensive. Then came the texts, and finally, the letters. The return address was the same house I'd kept alive for years. Now it was rotting without me. I started moving differently. Not hiding, just watching. I drive past their street every few days. Not to see them, but to see the collapse. It was slow, like watching a building sink an inch a day into its own foundation. First, the lawn grew wild. Then the porch light went dark. Eventually, a foreclosure notice showed up taped to the door in bright orange. I didn't stop. Just kept driving, window down, radio off. The wind felt cleaner on that block now, like it was finally airing out the lie. Daniel called again. This time, angry. "You think this is funny? They're losing everything. The bank's sending final warnings. If you had a problem with us, you should have said something like an adult." I deleted the voicemail. Funny how he still thought I owed him an explanation. Like after everything I carried for them, I still needed to hand over a map just to prove I existed. But I didn't. Not anymore. That version of me, quiet, compliant, eager to be seen, died somewhere between the final electric bill and the moment I realized I liked eating dinner alone. I wasn't trying to teach them a lesson. I was just done playing the role they wrote for me without ever asking if I wanted the part. Then one night, I left something on their porch. No name. No note. Just an unmarked manila envelope. Inside was a stack of printed receipts, mortgage payments, car payments, utility bills, every single transaction tied to my name. At the very top, I taped a copy of the original foreclosure notice they'd received years ago. The one I'd intercepted before they ever saw it. The one that made me decide to carry them without telling a soul. I don't know who opened it. Probably my mother. She was always the one to sort through the mail. I imagined her hands shaking, flipping through each page, watching her narrative crumble. Not just because of the numbers, but because of the timeline. All the years they praised Daniel. All the times they reminded me I hadn't turned out. All while I kept their lights on from a crawl space. I didn't get a response. Not at first. Just more silence. This one felt different though. Heavy. Like maybe, for once, they were really sitting in it. Maybe they were realizing what they'd done. Or maybe they were just stunned by the truth. People don't always mourn losing you. They mourn losing the illusion of who they thought you were. A few days later, I got an email from my mother. The subject line was just, "Please." I read it once. 2 sentences. "We didn't know. I swear to God, Eli, we didn't know. Please talk to us." I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say that hadn't already been paid for. Every month, every sacrifice, every moment, I let them believe I was less so they could sleep better at night. But I wasn't angry anymore. Not really. That was the strangest part. I thought vengeance would feel like fire, but it felt more like fresh paint over rotten wood, clean, but still hollow if you knocked too hard. What I felt now wasn't triumph. It was peace. A kind of peace I had to earn in the quiet. I went out back and clipped basil from the plant I'd grown. It was thriving. Strong. Rooted. I crushed a leaf between my fingers and breathed it in. I thought about how many things we overlook when we think they're too small to matter. Turns out, the smallest roots hold the whole thing together. Daniel tried once more. He showed up at my gate. Not at the house. He didn't know where I lived. But at a work site. He must have followed my van. "Eli," he said, like the word was foreign in his mouth. "You really let them drown?" I didn't stop working. Just kept turning the wrench under the sink. "You let me take the credit," he said. "Why? If you hated us so much, why not say something?" I looked up, calm. "Because you wouldn't have heard it. You were too busy listening to yourself." He flinched. Just a small twitch of the jaw. But I saw it. He wasn't used to being on the receiving end of truth without decoration. "They're gonna lose the house," he said. I nodded. "Yeah, that's what happens when the foundation's built on fiction." He didn't argue. Just stood there for a moment, like maybe he expected something else, pity, maybe, or a hug, or some last-ditch plea for reconciliation. But I had no more offerings. I was done feeding people who left me starving. He left without another word. The only sound was the soft click of his dress shoes on gravel. That night, I opened my notebook again. Wrote one line. They finally saw the ghost that fed them. Then I closed it and made dinner. Fresh pasta. Homemade sauce with basil. No phone nearby. No television on. Just music. Low and slow. In the open window letting in the scent of tomatoes growing outside. I didn't need them to understand anymore. They could drown in the absence they created. I was breathing just fine. It didn't happen all at once. Things like that never do. The unraveling of a myth is slow, thread by thread, lie by lie, until what you're left with is just the shape of something you used to believe in. I heard about the blow-up from a neighbor I used to know back when I still visited on holidays. She saw me at a gas station and couldn't help herself. "They're fighting," she said, like it was gossip, not blood. "Your brother stormed out last week. Your mom was screaming in the yard." I nodded and paid for my coffee, and for the first time, I didn't feel like I was on the outside of something. I felt like I'd dodged a bullet I used to call home. The confrontation had happened over dinner. Because of course it did. My mother had laid out the envelope. My father asked where it came from. Daniel, cornered for the first time in his life, tried to spin it. Said he was protecting them. Said it was a family arrangement. But even she couldn't swallow that. She started counting out the receipts aloud, pointing at dates. "You said you were struggling at work then. You said you couldn't even afford rent." My father, always the quiet one, finally asked the question no one had dared until now. Was it Eli? I wasn't there to hear the silence that followed. But I can imagine it. I know how silence can hang in a room like a noose. The truth doesn't need fireworks, it just needs time to land. And it landed. Hard. My mother cried. My father sat with his hands folded like he was praying to a God he didn't believe in. And Daniel, the golden son, the success story, the one who'd always been too good to lift a wrench or say thank you, he was finally exposed. Not as evil, just hollow. Built on credit he didn't earn and love he didn't return. The fallout came fast after that. The car, my father's, was repossessed. The mortgage moved into foreclosure. The utilities were gone. Their house became a shell. The same house I used to drive 2 hours to repair whenever the sink leaked or the water heater faltered. No more patch jobs now. No more invisible glue. The foundation they stood on was gone, and all that was left were the cracks they tried to paint over for years. They reached out again. More letters. More apologies, now dripping with humility that would have meant something if they hadn't waited until they lost everything. My mother's handwriting looked different, smaller. She called me her miracle, said they never meant to hurt me, said they were proud, so proud, just didn't know how to say it. The way I see it, if someone can't tell you the truth while they're fed and housed, you don't owe them your truth when they're starving. Love born of desperation isn't love, it's survival. I didn't reply, but I didn't throw the letter away either. I folded it neatly and slid it into the same folder with the receipts. Not because I needed to keep the record, but because some truths don't belong in the trash. They belong in the archive. Somewhere quiet, for when you need to remind yourself that remembering is not the same as reliving. Daniel sent one final text. I messed up. I get it. But you proved your point. So what now? I stared at it for a long time. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I knew exactly what not to. There was a time I would have given him a monologue, walked him through every scar he left behind like it was a guided tour of my pain. But I didn't know him that. Growth isn't explaining yourself louder. It's walking away with your peace intact and letting them fill the silence with their own echo. So I sent back 4 words. There is no now. He didn't reply. And just like that, the myth of Daniel unraveled for good. No parade. No dramatic exit. Just absence. Sometimes that's all it takes to ruin a person who was built on attention. Weeks passed. The foreclosure was finalized. The house went up for auction. I didn't bid on it. I thought about it, just for a second. The poetic justice of it. But I didn't want their ghosts in my walls. I didn't want their shame soaking into my floorboards. I already had a home. One I built with no help, no applause, no illusion. That was enough. Miss Halvorson invited me for tea again. Her sink was fine, but she said the company helped. We sat in her kitchen while the sun poured in through the curtains, and the smell of old lemon cleaner wrapped around us like a memory. She asked if I had family. I paused for a moment, then said, used to. She didn't press. Just poured more tea and handed me a cookie. That night, I went back to the garden. The tomatoes were coming in heavy, ripe, and red. I picked 3 and set them on the counter. Then I reached into the drawer and pulled out the old photo of Daniel and me. I looked at it for a while, 2 kids who didn't know what they'd grow into. Then I slid it into the back of the folder, behind the receipts, behind the letter, behind the silence. Not erased. Just finished. People always talk about revenge like it has to leave a mark. But sometimes, the deepest revenge is making peace with the parts of yourself they never bothered to know. Sometimes, it's letting them fall from the pedestals they forced you to kneel beneath, and never looking back to see if they learned how to stand. It was the letter that caught me off guard. A plain envelope with my name on the front in shaky cursive, no return address, but I knew who it was from the second I saw the loop in the E. My mother's handwriting had always leaned forward, like it was trying to outrun itself. I stood in the doorway holding it for a while, not moving. The sky behind me was starting to storm, that thick silence before thunder rolls. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I already knew what was inside. An apology, too late. Maybe a confession. Maybe hope. But mostly it would be pain, trying to disguise itself as love. So I placed it on the table, next to my coffee, and left it there like an object in a museum, something to look at, not touch. Instead, I went about my day. Repaired a busted outdoor spigot for a retired teacher down the road. Gave her a discount without saying why. She offered me a slice of pie she'd baked that morning. I accepted. Her kitchen smelled like nutmeg and old stories. We sat for a while in comfortable silence. She didn't ask about family. I didn't volunteer. That's the kind of peace I've learned to recognize. People who don't need to know everything to sit beside you without judgment. When I came home that evening, the letter was still there. Unopened. Unmoved. I picked it up once, then put it back down. I didn't hate her. That surprised me. I didn't even resent her anymore. What I felt now was something colder, calmer, indifference with a thread of pity. She'd lived her whole life with a son she couldn't see, and now she was asking for forgiveness from a man she'd never taken the time to know. That's the cost of blindness. Sometimes, by the time you learn to look, the view's already gone. A week later, I gave the letter to my apprentice, a quiet kid named Marcus. He reminded me of myself at 20, soft-spoken, underestimated, always working like someone had a timer running in the background. He came from a rough place. Parents gone. Trying to get his GED while learning to snake drains and solder joints. He asked me once what made me go into plumbing. I told him the truth. I like fixing things people don't think are worth saving. He nodded like he understood more than I expected. So when I handed him the letter, I told him, use it as a coaster. Or kindling. Or nothing. Doesn't matter anymore. He didn't ask what was inside. That's why I trust him. In my garage, I finished the table I'd been building. Oak. Heavy, imperfect. I ran my hand over the grain and thought about how much quieter life had gotten. Not empty, just full in different ways. Full of choice. Full of things that didn't ask to be earned over and over. I had friends now. Not many. Just enough. People who didn't care what I wore or where I lived or whether my boots tracked in dirt. People who saw me, not the resume, not the silence I used to wear like a second skin. Just me. I sent one last envelope. Not to them. To the bank. Inside was a cashier's check with a note. For the next family. Don't let it rot. I didn't sign it. Just mailed it anonymously. That house had taken enough from me. Let it give something to someone else for once. That night, I lit a fire in the backyard. Threw in a stack of old pay stubs. Not out of spite. Just release. Watched the ashes spiral into the dark like dust from a forgotten chapter. I didn't keep the receipts. Didn't keep the letters. I kept the mug, world's okayest son. In the garden. Everything else, I let go. Sometimes people think revenge means fire and fury, but I've come to learn that the sharpest revenge is healing in plain sight. Living well. Living real. Not having to say, look what you lost, because your absence says it louder than any speech ever could. My family lost me long before the payments stopped. They just didn't realize until the silence started costing them. I don't celebrate their downfall. That's not what this is. I don't check in. Don't ask around. If they're still trying to piece things together, they'll have to do it without me. There's no forwarding address. No key under the mat. No line left open. Just space. And within that space me. Free. A few months later, I stood in the backyard, harvesting the last of the tomatoes. Marcus had stayed late helping install a water heater for an elderly couple who couldn't afford it. I handed him 2 tomatoes and said, you'll understand one day. Not everything we fix needs to be seen. He smiled, the way someone does when they don't know if you're talking about plumbing or something else. I didn't clarify. Let him carry it like a seed. That night, as I locked the doors, I paused at the window. The moonlight caught on the edge of the oak table. It looked solid. Settled. Like something that belonged. I turned off the lights one by one. No one would come looking for me now. And if they did, they wouldn't find the boy they left behind. Just a man who chose himself and never looked back. If this story stayed with you, take a moment before you scroll, because chances are, someone else out there needs to hear it too. Share it with the person who's always been the quiet one, the one who never got credit but kept showing up. And if you're ready for more stories where silence carries the sharpest edge, where redemption doesn't need an audience, make sure you're subscribed. We tell the truths no one claps for. See you soon in the next story.